and welcome to tonight's First Steps webinar presentation. Now, just before we go any further, I'd just like to make sure that the technology is working okay. So hopefully you should be able to see one camera feed and a slide deck that has First Steps orientation session on it, and you can hear my voice. So if you can just send us a hi, hello, a smiley, something that just lets us know you're out there, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, brilliant. We've got some highs and hellos coming through. Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. Right, okay, so let's do some introductions. Helen, would you like to bring yourself in?
Yeah, thank you. Hi there. So my name's Helen, and I'm one of the psychological wellbeing practitioners working here at Steps to Wellbeing. So that just means that I'm trained to carry out assessments and to treat those with common mental health problems. Just been having a few internet problems today, which is why my camera's not on, just to make sure that we've got no disruptions with the running of the webinar. So hopefully that will all go smoothly today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Helen. My name's Julian, and I work as an employment advisor, and I'll tell you more about what I do as we go through today's session. Right, let's just look at some of the practicality bits. So we're going to run through till about 7:15 today. We are going to record tonight's session, and we will send you all a copy of the recording, hopefully by the end of this week. But it just depends how quickly I get the link through to where we host it on YouTube. We are working on this platform called GoToWebinar. That means it's quite secure, so you can see us, you can hear us, and you can see the slide presentation, but we can't see you and we can't hear you. We have got an interactive session tonight, so if you have any questions about the content we're covering, then please use the written Q&A to send those in. If the answer to your question is something which we're going to cover in the presentation, then we'll deal with it that way. If the answer to a question is a bit more specific to you, then that question will be answered in a written form, and that will just come back to you. The only people who can read your questions are Helen and myself. You're the only person who's going to read the answer that we send you. In terms of knowing that you have attended, the way we do that is through asking you to complete a set of the questionnaires which you will have used at your assessment. So what we call the MDS questionnaires, which start off with the PHQ-9. So there are 4 of those questionnaires. They will have been sent to you in the last 24 hours. For most of you, they'll have gone to your junk or spam folder in your email system. For some of you, they will have gone to as an attachment to a text message that will have been sent out to you. So I know quite a few of you have filled those in already, which is fantastic. But if you are out there, then I just ask you to complete those questionnaires so that we know that you've attended tonight. Anybody who's out there who doesn't fill those questionnaires in, when we do the administration, which will be on Friday, then you'll get an automatic email to say that you didn't attend tonight's questionnaire. So they will already be with you in either your junk or spam folder or in your as a text message attachment. So please do look out for those and fill those in. Other bits for tonight, if you need to go and pick up a member or deal with a member of the family, make a cup of tea, answer the telephone, the door, then please go ahead and do that. We don't know that you disappeared, but it'd be great if you come back afterwards just to keep carry on with the session. So those are the key things. Now, let's one more. So we do quite a lot of our work over the internet at the moment. So if you're booked in for a session, but for any reason you're not able to attend that session, then it'd be really helpful if you can just keep us informed about your inability to attend that session. That just means that we can make sure you get a recording, and it also means that we can check in and look at getting you rebooked in for the next session. So we've got an email address on the bottom here. So that's the email address to use if you're booked in for an online session but not able to make it. Okay, so let's then think about safety and well-being. So we do recognise that our mood can change over time, and it's possible that our mood can drop. And it's really important to remember that if that is happening for you, that there is always somebody out there that you can talk to. There's always somebody that you can reach out to. So just some thoughts in here about things to consider. So Think about family, friends. They can be really good support. When you did your assessment, you would have explored a management plan, so please think about what you explored and discussed and agreed in that. We've also got the Samaritans, and they're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We've got their phone number and email contact here. The Samaritans are an anonymous service, so you don't have to say who you are, but just the act of talking to somebody else can be really helpful. We've also got NHS out of hours support, so we've got 111 999. You've also got the opportunity to see if you can get an appointment with your GP. I know that can be challenging at times, but they normally have some emergency appointments available. And we've also got, if you live in the Southampton area, support through the Lighthouse. We've got their email address and or their website address. We've also got Soul and Mind, who are available. And if you're in the Dorset area, we've got the Connection service, which is run by Dorset Healthcare. That's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service. We've got the phone number there. We've also got the retreats. So we've got one in Dorchester, which is temporarily closed for face-to-face visits. We've also got the Hanneman House in Bournemouth. If you are not in the Bournemouth area, we have got online access to support through the retreats. And you can do that either through the Connection, either through 111, the Connection service, or by going onto the website. So there's always support out there. So please, if you do notice your situation has changed, reach out. If you're concerned about your life, then 999 will take yourself to your local A&E. Okay. So I'm going to hand over to Helen, and she's going to take us through the next part of the session.
Great, thank you. So what we're going to have a look at then is initially just a brief bit of information about our service, as well as mental health difficulties in the general population. We'll also have a look at what can start mental health difficulties, because it might be that there's a particular trigger that you're aware of that's kind of the reason why you're feeling the way that you are, or it might be that it's been a build-up of lots of things, lots of different things that are contributing to the way you're feeling. We'll also have a look at what keeps those difficulties going, because if we're aware of what keeps our mental health difficulties going, then we can tackle these in therapy, and that can really improve our chance of success with treatment. We'll also have a look at what to expect from treatment as well, and Julian's going to go through some tools and techniques that you'll be able to sort of start using straight away, really, that are really helpful whilst you're on the waiting list for therapy. So that's just a bit of an overview of what we'll cover today. So first of all then, looking at Steps to Wellbeing and who we are. So Steps to Wellbeing is part of a national initiative called IAPT, so Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. And it was rolled out over 10 years ago now. And it was initially created so that everybody had the opportunity to receive therapy support. And we offer support for anyone who's experiencing anxiety, depression, might be sleep difficulties, difficulties at work, social adjustment, stress, phobias, panic, and other mental health difficulties as well. And within the service, everybody comes in and has an assessment, and then a joint treatment decision would be made between you and your assessor. So that would have already taken place, and it's now likely that you're on the waiting list to receive one of the two main types of treatment. So that will either be CBT, so cognitive behaviour therapy, or counselling. And these are delivered either on a one-to-one basis, or it might be a webinar format like today's session, or perhaps in an online group setting, so a bit more like a Zoom call. And with CBT, it is a short-term and present approach, and it's focusing on what's going on for you in the here and now. And it aims to teach you skills to be able to identify unhelpful and negative patterns of thinking and of behaving, which can create a vicious cycle of poor mental health. So within CBT, those strategies and techniques are learned in order to promote change and to break into that vicious cycle to reduce those negative symptoms. And these can be really helpful for what we're currently dealing with, but also the techniques can be thought of as life skills as well, so skills that you can draw on in the future if you find yourself in a similar situation. And we also offer counselling as well. So again, this is short term within our service. And the counselling is a more reflective approach. So the counselling gives you the opportunity to be able to explore your personal difficulties and understand your current difficult situation better. It gives you that space to process what's happened, process those emotions involved so that you're then able to move forward in a more positive way, so that that sort of problem has less impact on your day-to-day life. And within Steps to Wellbeing, counselling is just for depression, whereas CBT is recommended for both anxiety and also depression. We also do have our employment advice service as well, and I'm just going to hand you back to Julian, who will tell you a bit more about that.
Thanks, Helen. So we have an employment support team because we do recognise that the relationship we have with work can be an important part of our mental wellbeing. And we do recognise that certainly over the last 2 years, the pandemic, COVID, has made a real impact for pretty much everybody in terms of having to work differently, having to work from home, perhaps being put on furlough, for some being made redundant, having to use new technology, redeployment. So all of these things have had a significant impact in terms of our relationship with work, and that can have had a really challenging impact on our well-being. So we know that things like a pandemic can cause an impact, but it's not just around extraordinary events like that. We're also here to support people who are, for example, out of work and trying to get into work. It might be that you're currently away from work on long-term sick leave and trying to find your way back into the workplace. It might be that you've got challenges within the working environment, so perhaps with a colleague or with a manager. It might be something which, on the face of it, should be an encouraging step, things like promotion, and then suddenly discovering that actually being promoted brings its own raft of challenges, and that can sometimes have a real impact on our mental well-being. So there's a wide range of scenarios that can definitely impact on our engagement in the workplace, and that's what we're here to support with. So we work in a very similar way to the therapy side. We start off with an initial assessment, which just helps us to understand what's happening at the moment in the workplace, what support you think it would be useful to access, and then for us to think about some practical ways to support. And then we have up to 6 sessions to develop that conversation and those ideas. Now, it might sound like a comparatively short period of time, but it's surprising what we can actually achieve in that comparatively short, focused interaction that we have. So we're here to support you alongside the therapist in getting to where you would like to be and making a positive impact in terms of your situation. So hopefully, when you had your assessment, you would have explored whether employment support was something that you felt would be useful for you. And if that was identified, hopefully you've been referred to the employment team, and hopefully you've started to work with somebody. And I hope that's going well. If you were thinking about that, but you decided not to at the moment, never too late to come and have a conversation with us. And if it wasn't discussed, then once again, never too late to come and have a conversation and see what we might do together. So 4 ways to reach us. There's an email address on the bottom of this slide, so you can drop us an email through there. You can drop us a message in tonight's Q&A, and I can pick up from that. You can have a chat with your therapist when you start working with them and ask them to do the referral, or you can have a chat with whichever admin team you're with, whichever service you're with, and they can start the ball rolling into putting that connection in place. So never too late to come and have a chat, and maybe we can do something really beneficial and really helpful for you. Okay, so I'm going to hand back to Helen now.
Great, thank you. So next then we're just going to have a quick look around the healthcare system and how that works within England with the step care model. So IAP services were designed to bridge the gap between primary care services like GP surgeries and secondary care services like the community mental health team. And within IAP we've got 2 main steps, so step 2 and step 3. And step 2 is where psychological wellbeing practitioners, or PWPs like myself, work. And it would have been a PWP that carried out your assessment. And within step 2, we treat mild to moderate symptoms of low mood and anxiety disorders, like panic, generalised anxiety, OCD, phobias. And then we also look at other lifestyle factors as well, like stress and sleep as well. And then we've got step 3. So this is still within Steps to Wellbeing, but this looks to manage more moderate to severe symptoms. And within step 3, we look at more specific anxiety disorders that require more intensive therapy, like PTSD and social anxiety, health anxiety, more long-standing kind of symptoms of OCD, and also counselling as well within our service. That falls within step 3. And then step 4, so that's a step up from steps to wellbeing, and that includes the services like the community mental health team, and they deal with more complex difficulties like complex trauma and personality disorders. So that's just a bit of an overview of what we have at the moment and where steps to wellbeing fits within that. So next we're just going to move on and have a think about how common is stress, low mood and anxiety, because often it can feel like we're the only ones struggling, but actually it's really common. And some latest statistics that have come out recently is reporting that it's 1 in 3 people that will experience mental health difficulties at least once during their life and seek further support for it. And some more recent statistics have shown that it's closer to 1 in 2 because people are reporting more and seeking help for those difficulties. So of all the people that you come across in your life, that's half of them that will be struggling with their mental health at some point. And in England, it's 1 in 6 people that report experiencing a common mental health problem in any given week. So that's 1 in 6 people right now that are struggling. And that's why services like Steps to Wellbeing exist, because it is actually becoming more common to suffer with mental health difficulties than it is not to. So you're definitely not alone, and there are those, there is that support out there for you. So next, I'm just moving on to have a think about your journey. So we often talk about improving mental health as a journey, featuring lots of twists and turns, lots of ups and downs, can often feel a bit like a roller coaster. But actually, without making any change, everything will stay the same. And we can't stay as we are and expect things to get better for us. So we've got that control and that power to change things for the better. And actually, the reality is that you've already started to do that. You've started to take back control of your mental health and have already overcome the first 2 hurdles. So you've already acknowledged yourself, actually, something's not quite right. And then you've actually sought and asked for help as well. So it's just a case of keeping going and making some positive changes. And actually, every step is something to acknowledge and to be proud of. You've already acknowledged those symptoms that you're having. You've reached out for support. You've gone through that assessment process and disclosed to a complete stranger what's been going on for you. And then you've taken the step to attend the webinar today. So it's really important just to acknowledge that progress that you've made and how far you've already come, and to keep doing that as well throughout the therapy process as you take those steps towards recovery. Okay, so next, we're just going to have a look at what might have led to this point. As I mentioned at the beginning, it might be actually that there's been a massive life event that's happened, and that's been a direct cause for the mental health difficulties, like some of the ones on the slide here, perhaps redundancy or loss of job in any way, change in job, breakdown of a relationship, moving house. It might be that you could have experienced a traumatic event, or even something joyous, so perhaps like starting a family or moving house, things that we want in our lives, but they do come with stress. Physical health as well can also lead to mental health issues, and there's a really high comorbidity rate between the two, because the way that we feel physically and our physical health has such a huge impact on our daily life that can really impact on our mental well-being as well. And stress and ill mental health can also be caused by an accumulation of lots of different things that life throws at us. So it might not be one particular event. It could be actually it's just lots of things, lots of little things that have built up, and it's got to that point where it's become really overwhelming. It's become too much, and we start to think that we're not able to cope anymore. So lots of different reasons, why you might be feeling the way that you are at the moment. So we've got on the next slide then a few of the common symptoms of ill mental health. So we've got a few listed here, and these are really normal, really common to experience. And you might well have talked about these within your assessment as well. So you might have noticed that you're feeling quite low in mood, maybe feeling anxious. You might have noticed changes in your sleep. So it might be that the low mood has affected your sleep, or perhaps anxiety. Because often when we're feeling quite low, we're not doing as much, and therefore we're not creating that need for sleep. So we can find it more difficult to fall asleep, or perhaps we're waking up through the night. or if you're feeling very anxious or stressed and our minds are racing and overthinking, it can prevent us being able to switch our minds off and actually go to sleep. You might have noticed that you're feeling quite low in motivation, not feeling very interested in things, perhaps feeling quite irritable, snapping at people, getting quite tearful. You might have noticed that you're finding it more difficult to concentrate on things and focus on things. Again, that can be a symptom of low mood, but anxiety can cause that as well. So where we're feeling very tense and constantly scanning for signs of threat, it can make it really difficult to concentrate on other things. You might be feeling more tired, very lethargic. Again, typically a sign of depression, but this can also be due to anxiety as well, where our body's working overtime and going through that anxious response, draining our adrenaline levels and leaving us feeling exhausted. You might have noticed that there's some more negative thoughts coming in, so kind of negative thoughts about yourself, about situations, worrying excessively. You might have noticed changes in your appetite, sort of increased appetite or lost appetite, feeling quite restless. There's lots of different symptoms. It might be that you can relate to all of those. It might be that you can just relate to some of those, but they are really common to experience, and there is the support out there to help to manage those and reduce those. And with these different symptoms as well, they can all impact on one another and keep us trapped in a vicious cycle, which can become really overwhelming. And how they're all interlinked and how they interact can be summarised in a common model that we use in therapy called the 5 areas diagram. So these 5 areas are our situation, our thoughts, how we feel physically, how we feel emotionally, and then our behaviours. And what we look to do in therapy is 2 different things. So we look at what keeps our vicious cycle going and what can we do to break into that vicious cycle. So we're just going to move on to have a look at a 5 areas diagram for someone who's struggling with depression. So we've just got an example here, a situation, perhaps a friend doesn't say hello. So perhaps walk in down the road and you say hello, someone doesn't say hello back, or you send a message or an email and you don't get a reply. So that situation can then lead to some negative thoughts coming in, such as people don't like me or done something wrong. And that can lead to us feeling very low and depressed. And then because of that, it can impact on our behaviours. So we might withdraw from others and withdraw from doing activities. And this can then lead us to feeling quite lethargic physically because we're not doing very much. And we're not kind of sort of boosting our energy, because actually we do get energy by doing things. I think most people can think of a time where you felt very tired and not wanted to do something, but gone out and done it and felt more energised afterwards. So if we're not doing as much and we're feeling more tired, we're more likely to have those negative thoughts coming in, such as I'm not good enough, people don't like me, I'm useless. And then because of those thoughts, we're more likely to avoid things, withdraw further, stay inside more, have less contact with people. And then because we're not doing as much and we're not creating that need for sleep because our energy is not being used up, again, we're feeling more tired from not sleeping. So more of those thoughts are likely to be going around in our heads, making us feel more depressed. We do less, struggle to sleep more, feel more tired. And then we're having difficulty concentrating, so we withdraw further. And it can keep us trapped in this vicious cycle. But actually, withdrawing from the activities or from other people maintains those negative feelings and those negative thoughts, because we're not getting so much enjoyment for doing things and we're having less opportunity to prove ourselves wrong. So if we've got all these negative thoughts coming in, like I'm useless and nobody likes me, we're not going to be able to overcome those thoughts if we don't put ourselves in a situation where we're proved otherwise. So one of the things that we look to do in therapy is encourage people to break into that vicious cycle by doing more and experiencing that enjoyment again. However, it's always done in small steps, appropriate to you and what your goals are for therapy, so that you're not feeling overwhelmed and it's not feeling like it's too much. So hopefully that makes sense, and some of you might be able to relate to that and maybe see how your own situation and thoughts and feelings would fit into that cycle. And it can be quite helpful just to kind of draw that out for yourself and see maybe if you can make those connections between those different areas. And we have got another example as well for a 5 areas diagram of a vicious cycle of somebody with anxiety. So often with anxiety, we have lots of kind of what if thoughts around maybe something bad happening. So lots of thoughts around what may or may not happen in the future, making us feel quite anxious around that uncertainty. So because of that, our body produces a surge of adrenaline to combat what's been perceived as a threat. So you might have heard this referred to before as the fight or flight response. And we get those really uncomfortable physical symptoms that come with anxiety. So increased heart rate, breathlessness, sort of changes in temperature, getting hot and sweaty, muscle tension, shaking. And then because of those really uncomfortable physical symptoms, our behaviours are impacted. So we escape the situation that's caused that anxious response and those uncomfortable symptoms because it gives us that short-term relief. But actually, in the long term, it's keeping that vicious cycle of anxiety going because it's reinforcing the belief that something bad would have happened. We're not giving ourselves the chance to prove that actually there's nothing wrong and nothing bad happened. So we then further believe in that negative thought. So the next time that we get that same sort of threat, that anxious thought of what if, for example, and we get those same physiological responses and we escape again, it can really sort of feed into us eventually avoiding lots of different situations. And that can have a huge impact on our day-to-day life if we're avoiding doing things. It might also be that we're seeking reassurance from others as well to alleviate that anxiety. But again, that can often feed into those vicious cycles and keep that going. So as I say, in therapy, what we look to do is gradually face those anxious situations that we are avoiding without escaping them, and recognising that the thing that we're fearful of happening doesn't happen, and recognising that that anxiety will reduce. So those physical symptoms that we experience with anxiety, they're really uncomfortable, but they're not harmful, and the anxiety will always reduce. So what we look to do in therapy is we start to recognise what's keeping our own individual vicious cycle going, because it's likely to be different for everybody. And then once we can understand what's keeping it going, we can then find ways to break into that vicious cycle to improve the way that we're feeling, sort of physically and emotionally. So hopefully that example makes sense as well. So if you're sort of suffering with some symptoms of anxiety, you might be able to see how that fits for you. So we're just going to move on to have a look at the therapeutic process in a bit more detail. So this is just a bit of an overview really of what you might expect to go through with your therapist. So initially there's that kind of building up of the relationship, building that trust, allowing you to feel comfortable to open up and offload. And that sometimes can take a bit of time because you don't know your therapist, and that's absolutely fine. That'll be taken into account throughout the process. If at any point you do feel like your therapist isn't the right one for you, which can happen and that's perfectly fine, then just let us know and we can have a look at assigning you to somebody else. There'll also be an exploration of your difficulties as well. So looking at what's brought you to the service, so what the main problem is, and looking at the specifics and focusing on what it is you want to get out of therapy. So those goals for therapy and what it is you want to achieve out of the sessions. And then it's looking at transformation. So this is a really key part of the therapeutic process. So this is where you'll be experimenting with positive change. So your therapist will teach you how to achieve the change, but then the expectation is on you to try out the change. So it might be challenging your negative thoughts, it might be testing your anxiety, and any form of talking therapy, it is a joint process. So it does require your motivation for change and for you to be an active participant to achieve those results as well. So it's always done with the support of your therapist, done in a safe way. It might sometimes feel like you are being pushed, but it's always done to help you, not to harm you. And if at any point you do feel like something is too much, then please do talk that through with your therapist. And then there's sort of reviewing the change. So again, this is something that is needed within therapy. So looking at how you got on with those changes, did they work? What went well? What didn't go well? And if something's not working for you, looking at what can we do to improve that? What can we try doing differently? And then there's the planned ending and evaluation as well. So this is where therapy is coming to a close. So the process is summed up and you'll review what you got out of therapy. And at this stage as well, you'll be taught some strategies to prevent relapse. So it might be looking at identifying your early warning signs, because if you're aware of what those early warning signs are, you're more likely to be able to recognise it early and sort of bring those techniques back into sort of interaction as well. It might also be sort of booking in a regular review, a sort of wellbeing review. So after those therapy sessions finish, is actually continuing booking in a weekly session just with yourself to sort of check in, or how am I feeling, and are the techniques still working for me? Am I still using them? It may be that there's some signposting would be beneficial at this stage as well to help you continue on that journey to recovery outside of the service. So yes, that's just a bit of an overview really of what to expect in general. And we're just going to have a look next at the therapies in a bit more detail. So starting with CBT. So with the CBT, so cognitive behaviour therapy, it's an evidence-based approach, and it's shown to be effective for those struggling with common mental health difficulties like low mood, anxiety, panic, the ones that we've talked about. It focuses on the relationship between our thoughts, our feelings, how we feel physically and emotionally, and our behaviours in that vicious cycle that I just spoke about. And it focuses very much on the here and now, so it's looking at focusing on the present rather than things that happened years ago. It does require commitment, time and practice as well. And your CBT therapist will teach you those techniques for you to change your life, but the responsibility is on you to learn those techniques and use them in your everyday life, because that's where the difficulties lie. And as I mentioned at the beginning, without change, everything will stay the same. However, your therapist will support you through that process, with appointments being sort of weekly or fortnightly. And as I say, the techniques can be really helpful for improving motivation and routine, facing anxiety, reducing negative thoughts, problem solving, reducing stress, or improving sleep. So yeah, it can really be helpful for a variety of different problems, and it is a structured and focused treatment. So next, then, just having a look at counselling. So this is a more traditional therapy approach. Again, it's time limited and evidence-based for depression, and that's stated by NICE guidance. So NICE is the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, and all healthcare professionals have to abide by their guidance. So all of the treatments that we provide within our service are governed by the evidence and the research that's been done by them. And because of that, we only offer counselling for depression, because there's limited evidence to suggest that it's successful for anxiety disorders. But the counselling therapy is an opportunity for you to be able to explore issues in a safe and confidential environment. And it aims to help you focus on what concerns you, helps you understand it more clearly, always respecting your values and your choices, and your lifestyle within this, and always in a non-judgmental manner. And then from this exploration of your difficulties, it then allows you to be able to develop opportunities for change so that you can move forward in a positive way. So those are the approaches and how therapy works. So next, just having a think about how we can get the most from therapy. So we've just got a bit of advice here on the next slide from some clients that have been where you are now, and a bit of advice based on what they found to be helpful. So they agree that therapy can be life-changing, but it does take time, and it's important to appreciate that it's not a quick fix. We don't have that magic wand to be waved to resolve all the problems. And actually recognising that it's not a quick fix and it does take time and patience from the outset can be quite helpful. It's also helpful to reflect on your experiences as well. So to take that time to stop and think about what's going on for you, which you've already done by coming into the service and going through the assessment and acknowledging that you're having difficulties. And therapy is about that too. So reflecting on techniques, how they're working for you, and if they're not, then exploring that with your therapist. Honesty as well, something previous clients have promoted. So for you not only to be honest with yourself, but also be honest with your therapist if something isn't working for you, and to not be scared of the truth. because actually confronting that can be a really crucial part in therapy. And yeah, being kind to yourself as well. I think that's a really important one. You know, it's not easy making these changes, and actually it's really important to be kind to yourself. We often sort of say to clients, think about what you would say to a friend, and use that same kind of kindness with yourself that you would use with a friend, because often we're much more critical of ourselves and have those kind of unhelpful thoughts like we should be okay, I should be able to cope. But actually it's really important that we challenge those negative and unhelpful thoughts and be kinder to ourselves. And also promoting practice as well. So there is an expectation that you would be doing work in between the sessions. You know, if you were thinking about learning to play an instrument or learning a language or something like that, you know, if you're just practicing for half an hour every couple of weeks, the same sort of time you might get in a therapy appointment, you're not going to improve as quickly as if you're practicing every day. So therapy is about that as well. The more practice and work you put in between sessions, the quicker you'll see those results and the faster you'll be improving. So we do appreciate that changing habits is hard. You know, we do have the capability to change them, and taking those small steps really do make a big difference. And it is really important to acknowledge that progress as you're making it throughout the therapy process, and praise yourself for it as well. And it's quite easy to forget to recognise the progress that we're making and how far we've come, sort of, you know, from the original assessment towards the end of therapy. But it's a really positive and powerful thing to do. So just really encourage you to do that as you go through the process. But yeah, thank you very much. I'm just going to hand you back over to Julian, and he's going to take it from here.
Thanks, Helen. So what we're going to do now is just to spend some time just thinking about some of those things that you can do from now that can support your journey to improve mental well-being. So we're going to spend some time talking about structure, exercise, but we can also call that activity, because that's easier to engage with. Diet, sleep, and relaxation. But just to start with, we're going to touch on the clouds on the right-hand side of the screen, which are referred to as the 5 steps to well-being. And there's a lot of evidence which shows the benefit of engaging in these types of areas. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. So the first one is about the idea of connection. We are evolved to communicate, to connect with other people, to share with one another. All our senses are about connection, and therefore the more we have connection with others as part of our life, part of our routine, the more beneficial that is. Now, certainly over the last 2 years, it's been a real challenge. We've had times when we weren't allowed to do that, but as the restrictions start to ease, as much as you can, we would just encourage you to start to think about how you can connect with other people. So whether it's on the phone, whether it's writing letters, whether it's using video chat, or even better, if you can do that face to face, we get enormous benefit from connecting with other people. And the diversity and the range of people that we connect with can also be really helpful. So connection is a really positive area to look at. The second one I'm going to just think about is this idea of keep learning. So if you think about our life journey, from birth through to the 20s, we tend to go through quite an intensive learning journey as we start to explore and understand ourselves, the world we live in, where we sit within that world, the dynamics of relationships. And then when we get into our 20s, often that learning journey can start to slow down. But if we think about the brain as a muscle, if we think about a muscle generally, the more we use a muscle, the more we exercise it, the stronger the muscle is, the stronger it becomes, the stronger it remains, and the more it's able to support us in what we want to do. And it's a similar journey when we think about our brain. The more active, the more engaged we can keep our brain, the more beneficial it is in terms of looking after us. So when we think about learning, it doesn't matter what you learn. The most important thing is that you're actually learning something. So whether it's learning new recipes, whether it's learning about yourself as you go through this journey, whether it's learning to dance, a new hobby, whether it's learning a new language, it doesn't matter what the learning is, but learning is a really powerful tool to support our well-being. It feeds into self-esteem, it feeds into self-confidence, so we get lots of benefits from the act of learning. And if you can find something that you are engaged with learning, looking forward to, that gives you some fun, some pleasure, some value, even better. So a couple of reflective questions. What have you just finished learning? And what are you learning at the moment? And if the answers to those two questions are a bit tricky to pin down, then it might be worth thinking a little bit about what do you want to put as part of your extended learning journey, because there can be real benefit from that. The third one that we're just going to touch on here is this idea about giving. So when we give of our time to other people without expectation, some wonderful things happen. Two wonderful things, really. The first is that the person we've done something nice for gets a dose of a chemical called oxytocin. And that's one of those chemicals that make us feel really good, and we produce that ourselves. The other really good thing that happens is that we, as the person who had done that good thing, also get a dose of that oxytocin. So we feel good about it. So it's a really good reason for doing good things for other people, because we feel good because we've done it. And it doesn't matter what you do. So it can be a simple thing like holding a door open for somebody who's following you. It might be that you're picking up the grandchildren when they're not expecting to be picked up by you, and you're taking them for a couple of hours to give the parents a bit more space. It doesn't matter what you do. It's the idea and the act of doing that. So some of you may recognise the phrase a random act of kindness. Some of you may be involved in volunteering. Both of these are really good examples of that idea of giving and benefit to both parties when we do that. So just some thoughts to engage with. We'll touch on the other two as we go through the main body of the session. So let's think a little bit about this idea of structure. We know that structure or routine can be really beneficial to us, but that when we're having challenges with our mood, it's very easy for there to be a negative impact in terms of that routine and that structure. So it might be that our motivation is low and it stops us engaging with activity. It might be that our energy levels, our interest levels are not there, so we kind of tend to back away from doing things. It might be that we've got anxiety about connecting and doing something, struggling with our concentration. But we know that when we start to back away from things which are normally part of our structure, normally part of our routine, that's not helpful for us. And what we typically see is that when we back away from things which were in our routine or part of our structure, that the things we back away from first are the things which normally give us pleasure. And we want to really try and stay engaged with those activities, because we want to find all the opportunities we can to put a smile on our face, to feel good about our daily situation. So what we can see is that this is often a progressive situation that develops. It's not something that happens overnight for most of us. And we can often not really be aware that things are dropping out of our normal routine. So it can be useful just to think back to a point before you felt or feel the way that you do now. And what kind of things were you doing in the course of a day or a week? And then think about, am I doing those things now? And if you recognise that those are things which have dropped out of your routine, then the question is, what steps can I take to start to bring one of those back into my routine? And as you start to bring one of those back into your routine, then start to think, what else can I start to bring back into my routine? So it's a progressive step-by-step journey, but it can be really beneficial for us to start bringing back in those things which usually give us pleasure, get those back into our routine, start to engage with them. We start to get the benefit from that. It can be a bit of a step to do that. We sometimes have to dig really deep to find that bit of energy and bring it to the fore and say, I'm going to use this bit of energy to make that connection, to do that activity. Because we do know that once we've done it, invariably we will feel better for having done it. And progressively that feeling of improvement will increase the more we engage with these positive activities. So just thinking about that structure, really beneficial. If you've got children, if you've got pets, particularly dogs, if you're in a workplace, these things all support the maintenance of that structure. They tend to keep us more focused on what we're trying to do. But if those things are missing, because they're not part of your life, then it can be much easier for that structure to start to break down. So just being aware of what is happening for you, what you used to be doing, and if you notice things are drifting away, one at a time, what steps can you take to start to bring them back in? Okay, let's then think about activity. So we know that activity is a really beneficial thing for us to do and is really well linked to improvements in our mental well-being. One of the things that activity does is it increases the levels of a chemical which we produce called serotonin. And serotonin is one of those key chemicals related to our mood regulation and feeling good. We also know that from activity we produce endorphins. And endorphins are another one of those chemicals which support us feeling good. And as the impact of the endorphin drops away, it acts as a stimulant for us to go and carry on doing activity because we want to keep going with that positive feel-good effect that endorphins give us. Now, some of you may be taking antidepressant medication, things called SSRIs, which are otherwise known as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So things like sertraline or citalopram. Now, what those medications do is they stop your body from reabsorbing the serotonin that you are producing. So they make it available for longer. But the evidence shows that if we can engage in around 30 minutes of moderate activity, 5 or 6 days of the week, we can actually replicate the impact of those SSRIs, that sertraline, citalopram, because of the fact that we are producing more of that chemical ourselves and it's therefore available for longer. So what's a moderate level of activity? Well, it's going to vary from person to person. The two key measures are that we want to feel our heart is having to work harder, and we also want to feel that we're out of breath, but still able to just about hold a conversation. And if we've got those two kind of measures in place, then we're working at that moderate level of activity. And when we think about the idea of having a conversation, what we're identifying there is that if we do things with other people, it's surprising how quickly that time passes. And we also get the benefit of that external motivator, that external support, that external incentive for us to engage in that activity. It's also worth thinking about how do we incorporate activity without it becoming something extra. So what we might want to think about is, when have I got little blocks of time when I can engage in activity? Because for some of us, 30 minutes might be a long period of time to work at that level of intensity. So it might be that we need to break that down. So it might be 2 15-minute blocks or 3 10-minute blocks, 6 5-minute blocks, maybe even start working a couple of minutes at a time. But if we can think about how we can incorporate activity into our routine anyway, then it becomes much easier for us to get to that kind of level. So, for example, when you're cooking and you're waiting for the veg to boil, then turn the music up loud. There's nobody else to watch you, so turn your kitchen into a disco. Have a boogie, because that's a fantastic way to get some of those minutes in place. If you like your gardening, then just increasing the intensity at which you do that gardening is going to help. We all need to go to the shops at some point in time, so when we do go to the shops, we typically go either in the car, and in which case we park as close to the front of the shop as we can, or we go on the bus and we get off as close to the shop as we can. If we park as far away from the front of the shop in the car park as we can, or if we park a few minutes down the road, if we get off the bus stop earlier and then we walk the rest of the way, we're actually starting to incorporate that activity into things we need to do anyway. And that way it becomes much easier for us to engage with that level of activity, get those minutes in, and then start to get the benefits. So even though shopping might be a chore, it can still be a really beneficial activity for us to engage with in terms of our mental health. We can see that when we do engage with activity, we get a number of benefits. So we can certainly see that it helps us to reduce stress. We can certainly identify that we feel less tired. It's a quirky thing, but when you are feeling tired, it's generally because your batteries are getting a bit run down. And we can actually recharge our batteries by doing some activity. So when you get those moments in the middle of the afternoon when you're just feeling really sluggish, you just feel like getting off the sofa is a really tough thing to do. It can be, but if you can get off the sofa and then if you can start moving around, it's surprising how much a bit of movement and a bit of activity starts to recharge the batteries and starts to help overcome some of that fatigue. We also can recognise that it helps us to reduce tension. And tension is something which we very much do tend to suffer from in this day and age, where we sat down working on a keyboard, so we get tension across our shoulders, neck, back. So when we're being active, we're helping to overcome that. We also can see that we get an improvement in alertness and concentration, because we're, in a sense, we're kind of waking ourselves up when we're active. We're waking up our cardiovascular system, and that can have an improvement in terms of our alertness and concentration. Activity and sleep link very closely together. So increasing activity improves engagement with sleep. And when we're doing things, we do feel better about ourselves. That can feed into self-confidence as well as self-esteem. So lots of benefits that come from looking at trying to increase the activity levels that you have in your day. Really beneficial. Okay, so let's then think about our diet. So one of the ways to think about diet is that it's the fuel that allows our body to function. And just as your car, for example, works well when it's got more than a thimble full of petrol or diesel in the tank or electricity, so our bodies work well when they are fueled and able to function well. There is definitely a correlation between mental health and diet. So when we think about what we are eating, it's worth just reflecting on how is that supporting me. So we want to think about having regular fuel intake. So we have had for many years breakfast, lunch and dinner. They've worked well in the past. There's no reason why they can't continue to work well for us. And we also want to think about the balance of the foods that we eat. And there are a couple of different ways to think about that. So one of those is to think about the colours of the rainbow. You may have heard that phrase, eating the colours of the rainbow is really beneficial for us. And it absolutely is, because different coloured foods contain different vitamins, minerals, trace elements, different kinds of protein, fats, carbs and sugars. And we do need that mix for our body to work well. Our body is a really complex organ, and if we feed it well, if we fuel it well with that balance, so it will function well. The other one to think about is the idea of having at least 30 different plant-based foods as part of your overall diet in the course of a week, because that's another way that we increase the range of vitamins, minerals and trace elements that our body really needs to function well. So why is it important for us to think about how we fuel our body? Well, let's just think about an example where we're experiencing a stressful situation. So Helen's touched on this idea of the fight or flight response when we feel under threat, which is often how we feel when we experience that stress. So our body is getting ready to either run away from what we perceive as that threat, that danger, or it's getting ready to fight its way out of that situation. We're not going to do either of those things, but what our body is doing is burning through fuel. So as we burn through that fuel, we then become fuel depleted. And typically what we do is that we go for those products which give us that quick feel-good fix. And those tend to be things which have a high fat, high sugar content. So we tend to think about cakes, biscuits, chocolate, confectionery. And that fuel is very easily absorbed by our body. So we then feel really good because we've suddenly got this hit of these things that we like. But because that's so easily used up by the body again, we tend to burn through it really, really quickly. And then we have to go back and have more of those types of foods. So that's not really helpful for us, because we get these exaggerated peaks and troughs of energy and no energy, and we're resorting to less than ideal food sources to get that fuel from. So we want to think about trying to move to having things like fruits and vegetables, nuts, oats, whole grains, pulses, because these foods release their sugars much more, or their energy much more slowly. So whilst we still will have those peaks and troughs, the gaps between them, between the wave height and the wave depth, will be much less. And that means that we're much more stable in terms of our energy levels, and that's much more beneficial for us. So just thinking about the foods that we're using to keep ourselves fueled is really beneficial. Now, we know that some foods are well linked to well-being. An example of those are things like bananas. So bananas firstly come in a biodegradable wrapper, which is a good thing. They also contain a chemical called tryptophan, And tryptophan is one of the building blocks of serotonin, and we've touched on the benefit of serotonin. And they also contain potassium, which is really important for how our body functions. And if you think about tennis, if you watch the foods that tennis players eat, you'll consistently see bananas as being one of the fuel sources that they use, because it's got beneficial components in it that support our well-being. Now, tryptophan is something you can find in lots of different kinds of protein, be they animal or plant. So as long as your diet is varied, you're likely to be picking that up. We can also identify products which don't support our well-being as well. So think about alcohol and caffeine. So alcohol is a depressant. So when we're consuming alcohol, then it has that depressant effect for us. So if we're experiencing low mood and then we're having alcohol, we're kind of feeding into that, which is one of the things we want to try and avoid. And if we think about caffeine and products which contain caffeine, so it's things like tea, coffee, unfortunately chocolate, that's a stimulant. And so if we're experiencing something like anxiety, having caffeine on top of that is actually feeding into the kind of symptoms that we're experiencing. And unfortunately, or fortunately, you can now find products which have such high levels of caffeine in them that even if you were not experiencing any form of anxiety before you start consuming them, you're likely to experience anxiety type symptoms. So sweaty palms, palpitations, increased heart rate, because of the level of caffeine and the impact that it has on your body. So it's just worth being aware of the impact these things have for you. It's not realistic for us to say you can't have these things because they're part of how we live life. But what we would encourage you to do is to recognize the impact that these things have for you. So if that first drink leaves you in a nice place, but the second one you notice causes change, then perhaps it's that second drink to avoid. Having alcohol early in the evening with food is going to be more beneficial than having that alcohol later in the evening after you eat. Some people might think about having alcohol before they go to bed, and might think about it as the thing that helps them to sleep. And yes, to some degree that can happen. But unfortunately, alcohol is a diuretic. So that means it dries you out. It also makes you want to go to the toilet. So if you're having alcohol in the evening, then it is increasing the likelihood that your sleep is going to be disrupted and you're going to get woken up and need to go to the toilet. You also kind of wake up with that really dry mouth experience. And when we think about caffeine, it takes the body about 5 to 6 hours for the effect of caffeine to reduce by 50%. So if we're having caffeine quite late in the afternoon, in the evening, the impact of that caffeine stimulant is staying with you quite late into the night, early hours. And caffeine is one of the things that can be a real disruptor to engagement with sleep. So if you do like your caffeine, and I do, I like my coffee, then it's thinking about having perhaps a caffeinated version in the morning, go up to lunchtime, and then switching to a decaffeinated version after that, so that you give your body a chance to process that toxic element, if you like, that your body doesn't really want or need, and that will improve that engagement with sleep at the end of the day. It's also worth just noting that what am I going to say? Come back to me. So the last thing just to touch on here is, oh, that's what I was going to say. So caffeine is also a diuretic. So once again, having caffeine late into the evening is going to increase the likelihood you get disrupted sleep because you're going to want to go to the toilet. So the last thing just to touch on here is about hydration. That's about making sure that we have a good fluid intake. In a 24-hour period, if we don't take on board any fluid, we will become dehydrated. And when we are dehydrated, then a really important thing happens. And that's that our ability to make good decisions, to think clearly, is compromised. And one of the things we want to do is to ensure that you're able to make good decisions. So making sure that we stay hydrated is really important. We're going to get some of our fluid needs from the foods that we eat. So think about cucumbers, think about tomatoes, carrots, they have quite a high water content. So we get about 30% of the water or the fluid that we need through the food that we eat. That's why that variation in your diet is really important. The other 70% of the fluid that we need is going to come from what we drink. Now, anything that you can buy in a food shop to drink is going to be able to help you hydrate. But some things are better than others. So we've touched on the impact of alcohol and caffeine as part of that hydrating fluid intake. We can also recognise that things like sugary drinks are giving you unnecessary calories that you may not want. We can identify that the level of caffeine in some of the soft drinks can be really powerful in terms of impacting against us. So the thing that we'd really encourage you to make as a key part of your fluid intake is water. Water is the fluid that your body was evolved to work with. It's really key for how our body functions. And if you think about two things, your body is 60% made up of water. Your brain is 73% made of water. So making sure that we have a good fluid intake, a good water intake is really important for making sure we stay well hydrated and making sure that our body is able to function well. So in terms of how much we need to drink, we're looking typically at 2 to 3 litres of fluid per day to make sure we stay hydrated. If it's hot outside and we perspire more, if we're increasing our activity levels, we'll need to drink more. So we need to make sure we stay well hydrated. And quite fortuitously and quite happily, we do have a built-in gauge that helps us to identify our hydration level. And that's the colour of your urine. So if you've never done this, do an internet search for an LHSP colour chart and then just start to gauge what the colour of your urine is like compared to the chart. And that will help you to identify when you're well hydrated and when you might benefit from increasing your hydration level. So let's then think about sleep. So sleep is a really key area, and it's often been identified as the most important free medicine that we can give our bodies, because sleep impacts on every part of our body and how we function. But you're not alone if you find challenges with engaging with sleep and having a good night's sleep. It's something which impacts a significant percentage of the population in Western worlds. So you're not alone. But if we can find ways to improve our engagement with sleep, we get really good benefits from that. So sleep is a time when our body is going to go through repair, recover and growth cycles. So if we think about babies, youngsters, teenagers, I appreciate teenagers are pain, but they do need a lot of sleep because they're still going through a lot of that growth cycle. When we get to the other end of life, so when we get into kind of mid-60s, so 65 onwards, we tend to need less sleep because we tend to be less active. And we've already touched on this correlation between activity and sleep. But for the rest of us, there is a consensus that we are looking at 7 to 8 hours of sleep as being the kind of figure that we need for our body to look after itself. So it is an individual thing, but broadly that's where we need to be. We go through a number of sleep cycles during the course of the night, and you can see an example of the stages of sleep on the right-hand side. So we go through those a number of times. And each of those stages supports us doing different parts of that repair, recover, and growth cycle. And one of the things that our brain does do when it's in that sleep mode is that it processes information. So there is research which suggests that we can have something around 30,000 thoughts in the course of a day. We're not aware of the majority of that. They're thoughts triggered by our senses. They happen, they go into our subconscious, they go into the in-tray, if you like. And then during the night, our brain is going to start processing that in-tray and starting to decide which filing cabinets that information needs to go into, what connections it needs to make between different bits of information. So it goes into processing mode. Now, we know that lots of things can impact on sleep, and one of the common ones is when we've got thoughts, often anxious thoughts, which are stopping us from engaging with sleep or which wake us up. And that can be really annoying. And one of the ways to think about that is that the thought is a ping pong ball that's been popped inside your skull and it's bouncing around. And that's really irritating. So we want to try and grab hold of that ping pong ball, pull it out, squash it so it can't go anywhere else, and then put it to one side. That way, we've got a physical record of that thought, and we can then look at it again later, hopefully tomorrow morning when we've woken up after a better night's sleep. Now, in practice, what that's looking at is the idea of having a pen and paper by the side of your bed, so that if you're lying in bed and you're struggling to get to sleep because those thoughts are there, then just jot down, bullet point those thoughts so that they're in black and white. They won't go away. They will be there tomorrow. But because you've taken them out of your mind, it increases the likelihood you will engage with sleep. And the same thing, if you get woken up and there's that thought, grab hold of it, get it written down. It's there. You will see it in the morning, but that increases the likelihood that you can then go back to sleep. And one of the really wonderful things about sleep is that our brain is going to do some problem solving. So often when we look at those things that we wrote down last night or in the middle of the night, when we look at them tomorrow morning, they often look far less significant than they did last night, because our brain's been trying to work out how to move forward with that particular problem. We've also touched a little bit on the adverse impacts of caffeine, alcohol, recreational drugs, and that can include nicotine. Nicotine acts as a stimulant primarily, and then a bit of a depressant afterwards. So these things can all adversely impact on your engagement with sleep. So it's really understanding what's the impact for you and what small steps might you look at and start to generate an improvement in your engagement with sleep. So it is often about quality rather than quantity. It is a progressive journey that you can work on. So one of the final thoughts to just look at in terms of sleep is that we have a thing called a circadian rhythm, and that's the sleep-wake cycle. So when it's light outside, we're alert and awake. When it's dark outside, we're asleep. And our body is programmed to do that. And from about 6 p.m. in the evening, your body is going to produce a chemical called melatonin. And that melatonin is about helping your body to slow down and to switch off. And it's about allowing your body to engage in those sleep activities that are going to go on internally. But what we can see is that we live a life which means that when it gets dark outside, we come inside, we turn the lights on, we turn our televisions, our laptops, our tablets on, we engage with very stimulating content, and that is overriding the impact of that melatonin, which is trying to encourage us to go to sleep. So it's about the screens, which produce a blue light, which mimics daylight. It's about the content, which is really highly stimulating. So we are fighting against our body's natural wish to go to sleep because of the way that we live life and how we socialize. So what we would encourage you to do is to think about putting a pause between our evening activities and the idea of sleep. And that pause is an opportunity for you to start to disengage from technology, disengage from stimulating content, allow your body to start to slow down, to wind down, to disengage, and that increases our likelihood of engaging with sleep. So we call it a sleep routine. And we're looking to encourage you to spend between 30 and 60 minutes in that sleep routine and have a range of activities that you complete every night at around the same time so that you build that positive engagement with the idea of sleep and that positive engagement with that habit that you're trying to build, because that will support better engagement. So we can also think about some good sleep habits that we want to think about, want to engage with. And we're going to reflect on this character Bert, which is your body, the environment, sleep routine, and the 20-minute rule. So the first one we think about our body is helping our body to relax and let go of the stresses and the tensions of the day. Get our body clean so that we're ready to engage with sleep. So that might be having a bath or a shower. It's also then start to think about disengage with it from that technology, disengaging from stimulating content, because that will support us. We want to think about our environment. So your bedroom ideally wants to be the coolest room in your property. So 1 or 2 degrees cooler than the rest. It wants to be dark, cool, quiet, and you want to have some fresh air coming in, because all of those help to create a good environment for you. We also want to think about a bedroom which is clean and tidy. So if your bedroom doesn't look like a teenager's, that's unlikely to help you with sleep. So having a clean, tidy bedroom is really helpful. If your bedroom is also your home office and your home gym, if you can, take those other activities out. Your bedroom is a place for 2 things, sleep and sex, nothing else. That way you're building a strong correlation that when you're going into the bedroom, sleep or sex are the 2 things you're going to do, not anything else. If you do all those other things in your bedroom, then your mind is always uncertain about what it should be doing at that moment in time, and that creates a disrupted connection with sleep. We want to think about having a clean, well-made bed. So most of us have duvets these days. So when you do get up, taking a moment to plump the pillows back up, to shake out the duvet and spread it over the bed, to pull the sheets tight, tuck them back in again, creates a much nicer, inviting environment tonight when you go back to sleep. Simply making sure that you're regularly washing your bedclothes, because it's harder to get to sleep as they get sticky through the natural perspiration that you're going to be generating when you sleep. So just a few things that can really support. We also want to think about avoiding clock watching. When you're trying to get to sleep and you're watching the clock tick over, that's not helping you. We've touched on ideas around anxious thoughts, so pen and paper, bullet point those thoughts, get them down. You might also think about journaling before you go to sleep, so that you're preempting that activity. You're just writing those thoughts down so that they're not in your mind, they're down on black and white. And we touched on that sleep routine, so the things which you're going to do at the same time every night to help you. If you use your alarm clock for your phone for your alarm clock, then turning off the audible notifications is really beneficial, because when you get that notification from some social media platform at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's going to wake you up. It's going to disrupt your sleep. And similarly, putting the screen face down, because when the screen lights up with that message, once again, it's enough to go through your eyelids, into your eye, into your brain, and it will alert you. You want to avoid that. Put the phone as far away from you as you can in the bedroom, because that way when the alarm goes off and you want to turn off that annoying noise, you need to get out of bed, put your feet on the ground, walk, turn off the clock. And once you've done that, don't go back to bed. Keep moving, stay on your feet. Have a morning routine. Have 1 or 2 or 3 things that you do every morning that start your day, that get you going. And if you are struggling to get off to sleep and it's been around 15, 20 minutes, don't stay there. Get up, go to another room, keep the lights up down low, do not engage with technology, and just allow yourself to become drowsy by doing something really dull or boring, because that will engage the idea of sleep again. Okay, so let's just touch on relaxation, which is something that we do have a challenge with doing, because we find ourselves time poor, and relaxation does take time. But if we can engage with relaxation, it can be really, really beneficial. So breathing is a really powerful relaxation technique. But a cautionary note, if at your assessment you were identified as experiencing panic or PTSD, please use breathing with caution, because for some people, using breathing as a relaxation technique can allow people to engage with a panic PTSD episode, and we don't want to do that. So it might be useful to chat with the therapist first. But just touch on 3 different relaxation techniques. So the first one is the idea of 7-11 breathing. So the idea here is that we are doing a count. It's not seconds, it's just a count which is comfortable for you. And the small number is breathing in, and the big number is breathing out. So we're spending more time breathing out, and that's creating the space for us to fill our lungs with fresh air. And that approach to breathing can be a really helpful one. It just helps us to calm down and relax. It's a count that's as comfortable for you. So if those numbers are too big, then bring them down. So bring them down to 5 and 7 or 3 and 5. It's about numbers which you're comfortable with. It's not seconds. And the key thing is that the out breath is longer than the in breath. and the count is equal on both breaths. So that can be a really powerful way just to help us to calm and relax. The second one is about progressive muscle relaxation. So we know that we pick up tension during the day. So one of the things that we're doing here is we're putting our muscles under tension. We're holding that tension for about 5 seconds. Then we're letting that tension go for around 15 seconds. So we're putting the tension in, letting the tension go. And it's surprising how effective that can be at helping us to feel relaxed. So you can start from your head and work your way down, or you can start from your toes and come back up. But applying the tension and then letting go can be a wonderful way to let go of tension that's picked up during the day. And it's something that you can use at any point in the day. The third one is mindfulness. So mindfulness is a point where you are using your senses to be really present in the moment, really aware of your current surroundings, not thinking about the past, not thinking about the future, but just thinking about right here, right now. It's about accepting the fact that thoughts will come into your mind. It's about acknowledging those thoughts and then pushing them away, and just coming back and really focusing on yourself right here, right now, really thinking about your senses and what those are telling you. It does take some practice, but it can be a really powerful way to relax. Relaxation is a journey, it's an exploration. Not every technique works for everybody, but if you can find a technique or two that works for you, it can be a really positive thing. And it does take a little bit of time, and it might mean negotiating a bit of space and time for you on a regular basis to start to engage with that world of exploration. And when you are trying a relaxation technique, it can take 4, 5, 6 goes before something really starts to connect. So we just encourage you to give something time before you say, this isn't for me, but there will be something that is for you. And some people do find guided versions of relaxation technique can be really helpful because you've got a voice which is just taking you through the process, and that can be a really easy way to connect with the idea. Okay. So let's just think about focusing and priorities. It really is important to start to focus on your well-being and start to put yourself first. Life is busy. There's lots of focus on us doing things for other people. It's very easy for us to lose that focus on looking after ourselves. So it is about creating that time and space for you. You are important. Now, if we think about the 4 pictures on the right-hand side of the screen, these are the pictures that you'll see on a flight safety briefing. And they make the point that in the event that the cabin air pressure is compromised and the oxygen mask comes out of the ceiling, you must put your own mask on first before you help other people. Because if you're like me, you can hold your breath for a while, but if there's no air, when you take that necessary breath, you will be unconscious and you won't be able to do anything for anybody else. But if you have put your mask on, then you can support the people around you, even if they're unconscious. So it is about taking that time to put the focus on us. So 2 reflective questions. What do you want to change in your life? And what do you want to get out of treatment? And the more clarity you've got about the answers to those, the more you can share that with your therapist, the more they will be able to support you achieving the goals which are important for you. And small steps, small changes are the ways to make a difference. Okay, let's just think about some resources to support you. So we've got a really good website here, Every Mind Matters, put together by NHS Public Health England for a campaign. There's some fantastic resources in there, so if you've not looked, be nosy, have a look. We've also got a range of resources for those of you in the Dorset area. So it's about being nosy, being curious, see what's out there. When we talked about that learning journey, this can be your learning journey for the moment. And ideas don't stop at county boundaries. So for those of you in Southampton, you've got a range here. As I say, there's nothing that stops you looking at each other's websites if there's one specific to you, because whilst the service might not extend into your area, the ideas certainly can. And finally, and ultimately, what we've covered. So Helen's given some brief information about the service, about what we offer, mental health difficulties in the general population. So it's useful to reflect that during the 3 lockdowns, half the population were experiencing anxiety and depression. what can start mental health difficulties, and that can include challenging situations as well as happy situations. What keeps those difficulties going? So start to think about your own 5 areas and what those are. Think about what to expect from treatment, whether that's counselling or CBT, and just some of the ideas that you can start to explore that can support you from now moving forward. So please do remember, you are important. Give yourself some space, give yourself some time, be kind to yourself. Small steps will make the difference. And ask yourself, what 1 or 2 things will you do for yourself now from today's session? So that's it from the main content. Just a reminder about your safety. If you do notice a change in your mood, please do think about the resource that we have on the slide. Do think about what you discussed in that risk management plan. There is always somebody out there to support you. You're never, ever alone. So that's it from me. Take really good care. Hopefully the day's getting longer, it's getting warmer, so that's a really good sign. Helen.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being with us this evening, and all the very best from here. Take care.
Ta-da.
Thank you. Bye-bye.